Welcome to this explainer. You know, when most of us picture the creation of the United States, we kind of tend to imagine this single magical moment on July 4th, 1776. We picture a group of founders struck by a sudden burst of inspiration, putting quill to parchment and just instantly changing the course of history. But the truth? Well, the truth is actually way more fascinating, because it wasn't the work of one moment or even just one person. It was a rigorous, sometimes messy, and carefully negotiated process. So let's dive right into this. If it wasn't just a spontaneous spark of genius on a single summer afternoon, how was it really written? To truly understand the foundation of the country, we've got to look past the myth and examine the actual process of debate, revision, and compromise that brought this incredibly famous document to life. Here is our timeline for this evolution. We're looking at April 1775 with the battles of Lexington and Concord. January 1776, when Common Sense was published, drafting beginning in June, final adoption in July, and the formal signing by delegates in August 1776.
Section 1, the road to independence.
To really grasp the weight of the Declaration, we have to remember the environment it was born into. By the spring of 1776, the colonies had already been in active, armed conflict with Britain for well over a year. Tensions had escalated way beyond basic disputes over taxes. The battles at Lexington and Concord had kicked off the violence the previous year, followed by heavy military engagements like the ongoing siege of Boston. Yet, surprisingly enough, not all colonial leaders initially wanted full independence. Many were actually still holding out hope for some kind of reconciliation with Britain. But events on the ground, coupled with the incredible influence of Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense in January 1776, drastically shifted public opinion toward a complete break.
Section 2, the Committee of Five.
So by June 1776, the momentum for independence was absolutely undeniable. The Second Continental Congress, meeting in Philadelphia, decided it was time to form a dedicated group to draft a formal declaration explaining exactly why the colonies were choosing to separate from British rule. They assembled a pretty remarkable cast of characters: Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston. This inner circle looked at the huge task in front of them and decided that Thomas Jefferson, who was widely known and respected for his formidable writing skills, should prepare the initial draft. Historians note that Jefferson essentially retreated to work largely alone for about 2 weeks. Drawing heavily on Enlightenment political philosophy, he wove in concepts that were already being widely discussed among colonial leaders at the time. He specifically leaned into the ideas of natural rights and the core concept that a government only derives its power by the consent of the governed. Now let's look at how this builds into a truly collaborative effort. Once Jefferson finished that solitary drafting process, the document didn't just go straight to the printer. Not at all. First, he shared his initial draft with John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. They reviewed it and made a number of their own edits and suggestions. Only after this inner circle refined the text was it presented to the full Committee of Five and then finally submitted to the wider Congress. Section 3. Debate and revision in Congress. Once the draft hit the floor of the Continental Congress on July 1, 1776, it faced some serious scrutiny over the next several days. Congress was definitely not shy about making significant changes, and they ended up editing and shortening the text considerably. One really notable change was the outright removal of a passage in Jefferson's original draft that explicitly condemned the slave trade. According to historians, this section was removed due to direct objections from certain delegates, particularly those representing colonies deeply tied to the economics of slavery. Many historians point to the removal of this anti-slavery passage as a profound early example of the deep and unresolved tensions surrounding slavery at the very founding of the United States. It was a foundational compromise, one born right out of this rigorous drafting process that would continue to shape American history and its internal conflicts for generations to come. Navigating those difficult compromises, Congress finally reached an agreement. But there is a distinct and honestly often confused difference in the timeline here. On July 2nd, 1776, Congress actually formally voted in favor of independence itself. It wasn't until 2 days later, on July 4th, 1776, that the final, heavily edited text of the Declaration was formally adopted.
Section 4, signing and spreading a word.
So the text is adopted, but what happens next? Well, here is where we get to bust another massive historical misconception. Most delegates did not actually sign the document on July 4th. The formal signing by most members of Congress took place weeks later, primarily on August 2nd, 1776. John Hancock, acting as the president of the Continental Congress, was among the very first to put his pen to the parchment, leaving that large, bold, and now famous signature we all recognize today. Over time, a total of 56 delegates eventually signed the document. And you have to remember, this massive collective effort wasn't just a political statement. By adding their signatures, these 56 individuals were literally committing an act of treason against the British Crown. It was a highly dangerous, unified pledge to support the separation they had just formalized. Once it was adopted and in the process of being signed, the word had to get out. The communication strategy back then relied on getting the text to the people as fast as physically possible. So the declaration was printed into copies, distributed on horseback throughout the 13 colonies, read aloud to crowds in public town squares, and widely published in local newspapers. The monumental news of independence spread like wildfire to the general public. So, what's the big takeaway from this explainer? The core truth is that the lasting foundation of the United States wasn't forged by a single stroke of genius in a vacuum. It was meticulously shaped through drafting, intense debate, and some really difficult compromises among lots of people with differing views. Its core ideas about liberty and self-governance endured, even as some of its unresolved contradictions remained deeply embedded in the nation's fabric. The words were finally on paper. They were heavily edited, agreed upon, and signed by 56 brave delegates. But making a declaration is one thing. Enforcing it against the world's most powerful empire is entirely another. The ink was dry, but the huge question remained. How would these newly united colonies actually win the Revolutionary War to make those words a reality?